We're going to split this up into probably two segments, looking at the day 1 through 3 and then day 4 and 5. So just to give an overview for anybody who may or may not be in the know of what this is all about. So last year, everyone's fully aware of all of the Black Lives Matter rioting that was going on across, well, the protests that were going on across America, one of which was taking place on...
I think we can call it rioting, because it was literally looting, burning and murdering people.
Yes, that is
so
true.
I think we can call it rioting.
Thank you, Susan. The one in particular is relevant to this was taking place on August 25th, 2020 in Kenosha, Wisconsin, as a result of the police shooting of Jacob Blake, which many thought was just another case of a white police officer randomly shooting a black man for the sake of it, but I believe that what came out afterwards was that he was trying to assault them with a knife.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was... being dragged, he was being detained by the police, and then he walked to his car to get a knife, and they were trying to stop him, and then eventually had to shoot him because he refused to stop as he grabbed the knife.
As you would imagine, BLM and other organisations decided to try and twist this, and it led to large-scale rioting throughout Kenosha. And in the process of that, there was a man, well, a boy, would have to say, given that he was 17 years old at the time, called Kyle Rittenhouse, who was present, going about with a AR-15 style rifle, trying to administer medical attention to people who were on the ground. In the process... he was attempting to put out a fire that he'd seen, and in the process of putting out the fire, he began to be pursued by an enraged group. One member of the group attempted to take Rittenhouse's rifle, who was Joseph Rosenbaum.
A convicted paedophile.
Yes, a convicted paedophile. And fearing for his life, Rittenhouse shot him, and he died. He tried to escape, but continued to be pursued by the group and was attacked by another man, Anthony Huber, who...
A convicted domestic abuser.
Yes, who hit him over the head with a skateboard. These details are very important and will be important to the trial as well. He hit him with a skateboard and shot him. Huber also died, and while trying to escape again, he was, I believe, drop-kicked by somebody while he was on the ground, who managed to run away and has not been seen since.
Understandably, yeah.
He tried to shoot that guy but missed. And then a man called Gage Grosskreutz, I believe I'm pronouncing
who I
that
believe
correctly.
is a convicted domestic abuser and burglar.
Yes, from the information that I've seen that we'll be going into later, I believe that to be the case.
I just want this to be important. So you have a 17-year-old boy who's being attacked by a convicted paedophile.
I think that alone...
I mean, isn't that not self-defense?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, these are scum.
Yes.
The absolute scum of the earth.
These are not pictures of virtue, as some elements of the media might have initially led you to believe after this happened, making it sound as though Rittenhouse had been going through the crowds of protesters, shooting indiscriminately, accusing him of being...
The Young Turks.
Yeah. Accusing him of being a white supremacist because he apparently once liked a Blue Lives Matter post on Facebook.
Gotcha now, Kyle.
Yep, and he was once in the same cafe as Proud Boys may have been at some point. These are the sorts of lengths that these people are... Yeah. This is the evidence these people are trying to stretch to make Rittenhouse seem guilty before he'd even been... tried of anything. And just to finish off that, Gage Grosskreutz, he approached Rittenhouse with a gun and tried to point it at him, and then Rittenhouse shot him, blew off his bicep. Grosskreutz is the only one of these people he shot who has survived, and he actually gave his testimony yesterday at the trial, which we'll get into. So as of last week, the trial began. We've covered a little bit of it on the podcast, including a lot of the pre-trial stuff. So they went through some pre-trial details, including how to define the self-defense against versus recklessness in the situation that Rittenhouse found himself in. You may also remember that the judge had decreed that the prosecution, which is the state prosecution trying to prosecute Kyle for murder, whereas the defense are attesting it as a clear case of self-defense, put forward, the judge declared that the prosecution weren't allowed to call any of these people he shot victims, rightfully so, because it could be seen as prejudicial language towards the jury, and also the very fact that the defense is arguing self-defense means that, well, once the trial is over, then we'll figure out if we can call them victims. Or
are they victims or are they assailants? I mean, from the video evidence we've seen, I know where I stand on that. But the question is, what is up in the air?
Yes, legally speaking, this is what all the trial is going to decide upon. So we've got a lot of this information from Legal Insurrection, who've been very good in their coverage of the trial, and also a lot of footage that has been broadcast on YouTube and other platforms that's been going live from the trial. So just to clear up some other details, so the judge is a man called Bruce Schroeder. The prosecution's being led by Assistant District Attorney for Wisconsin, Kenosha, Thomas Binger, and the Rittenhouse defense is being led by an attorney called Mark Richards, alongside a lawyer, Corey Chirafisi. Don't know how you're supposed to pronounce his name, because those names are all going to be relevant in the details going up. So, for day one, which I believe was last Tuesday, the prosecution and the defense were able to put forward their opening statements, and that's what we'll be going over right now. So, the Assistant District Attorney Binger, lead prosecutor in the case, presented the state's opening argument. Binger made repeated references to Kyle as having shot unarmed victims using an AR-15 style automatic rifle with 30 rounds in the magazine. It doesn't matter if they're unarmed, if they're trying to attack you.
But that's not even true.
Oh, yeah, that's also
I mean,
not true.
Gage had a gun, and the other one was using a skateboard as a heavy thing as a weapon, you know?
That is true.
So they're definitely not unarmed.
Yeah, and they also made sure to point out that after he'd shot them, Kyle didn't stay to care for those he'd shot, but simply walked away. I mean...
And handed himself into the police.
Well, attempted to.
Well, yeah, attempted to, yeah.
Presumably, he also walked away because there was still a large mob of violent people trying to assault him. But yeah, they also made the strange point that property is not worth more than life, which is a very strange point to make, seeing as it's not like...
In US law, that's not true. You're allowed to defend your property.
That is true, but it's also not like it's relevant to this case in the first place, because they attacked him, as the footage shows, and as the trial will go on to honestly, repeatedly show.
Is my property worth more than this paedophile's life?
I think you could put forward a compelling argument.
I have my arguments, yes.
Yes. Of particular importance to Binger was an oft-repeated theme that despite there being hundreds of people present that night in Kenosha, the only person who shot anybody was Kyle Rittenhouse.
It's only because Gage didn't have the chance.
Yes. I mean, once again, not really relevant to a self-defense case in the first place.
Not even slightly.
Yeah, and Binger also introduced the topic of the late-released FBI footage taken by aircraft over the scene, suggesting that it was Kyle who chased down Rosenbaum and that it was Kyle who was the initial provoker of the confrontation between the two men, rather than the reverse. So if we skip over to Jack Posobiec's tweet, he was one of the first people to break that this footage had been released. We don't need to show the footage properly, we'll just let it play there. He's actually showing the footage here, which is quite blurry and quite disorientating. The FBI supposedly had HD footage which went missing, although Posobiec himself has put forward the claim, I don't know what truth there is to this, that apparently they've managed to find the HD footage.
I look forward to seeing it.
And they might be releasing that to the trial as well. I wonder if they just left it in on a shelf somewhere, you know.
It's just
gathering dust. It's not like
just absent-mindedness, don't worry.
Yeah, but what this footage shows, because, as I said, it's quite disorientating, but if you actually track down the footage itself, they have helpfully circled the important actors in the footage, and they have this overhead view of it where they've also circled and labelled who everybody is. What the footage actually shows is that Rosenbaum was ahead of Rittenhouse on this street, and Rittenhouse began approaching Rosenbaum and a few other of the important people, presumably to try and put out this fire that was going on. And as soon as he starts to run towards him, Rosenbaum seems to skirt away to the right and hides among a few cars. It might show up on the footage in a moment. He seems to hide among a few cars, and it's only after Rittenhouse has run past him, which kind of suggests that Rittenhouse wasn't trying to chase after Rosenbaum in the first place.
Well, yeah, if he runs past
you can see right there, Rosenbaum hides among a few cars, Rittenhouse runs past, and then all of a sudden Rosenbaum starts to sneak back out to try and get the jump on him.
Yeah, you can see him.
Yeah, and it's at that point that Rosenbaum starts chasing him, starts shouting after him, chases him into this car park, and what you can't hear on...
So he throws the bag with whatever in it at the time, and you can see him shoot there.
Yeah, and you can also hear him on the footage, his last words being the ever-dignified F you. Yeah,
okay.
And what you also can't hear just through watching a bit of that footage was that before that incident began, Rittenhouse himself was wandering about shouting, "Anybody need a medic? Anybody need medical?" So it's all seeming to point this footage towards Rittenhouse not having done anything wrong.
Yeah.
at least in that initial confrontation.
Yeah.
And he was actively trying to help people on the ground. So if we go back to the article initially, you can see that was Posobiec saying that HD footage of the HD version of the FBI footage to be introduced in Kyle Rittenhouse trial after Human Events broke the story that the FBI withheld it. They initially said that it didn't exist anymore, but they seem to have found it down the sofa cushions, perhaps. So if we go back to the article again, so continuing their initial statement, the prosecution said that as for the attacks by others on Rittenhouse as he ran from the site of the shooting of Rosenbaum to the police line down the street because he was trying to understandably get to the police, he was pursued and attacked, and he shot Huber and Grosskreutz, as well as firing at an unknown male who was the person who drop-kicked Rittenhouse in the face and then took a run for it. Binger put...
Because before this, though, there was a shot fired, wasn't there?
Yes, I think somebody... I don't know if they confirmed if it was anyone. I think they might have confirmed it was somebody with a similarly Eastern European-sounding name might have shot a warning shot into
one of
the
the
air.
crowd, wasn't it? Someone in the crowd who had a gun who fired it in the air. So it's not like Rittenhouse would have been sat there going, well, this is an unarmed crowd. Some people in the crowd definitely had weapons.
Danger here.
Yeah, exactly.
Is what he would have been
and Rittenhouse would have been aware of that.
Yeah. And Binger, the prosecution attorney, put this all down as Kyle's fault because those other people purportedly reasonably perceived Kyle to be an active shooter that they wanted to stop. So he shoots somebody who he knows is trying to get his gun off of him and trying to assault him, and they automatically assume that this is an active shooter and try to stop him. I mean,
it's not how it looked from the footage that I was watching.
Also, if you thought there was an active shooter running about, surely my first instinct would be to run the opposite direction of an active shooter. So relatively irresponsible, even if that was what they thought, and also doesn't affect Rittenhouse's own perception of himself as being in danger and defending himself as such.
No, not at all.
And then it moved on to the opening statements by the defence, Rittenhouse's defence. So it says here in the article that the state had initially objected to the defence's uses of exhibits in the opening. Binger had discovered to his dismay that Richards had planned to use a bucketful of exhibits in the form of photos and videos of the events in presenting the defence opening statement to the jury.
You're not allowed to use evidence to defend yourselves.
I know. His argument was it's not fair. I didn't do any of that, so he can't either.
Well, you don't have any video evidence that would exonerate any of your clients. Yeah,
and he was like, "Oh, we don't know if these exhibits are relevant, even though surely they'd been already shown to be relevant in being accepted by the court."
Yeah.
And Schroeder found none of these exhibits of evidence to be objectionable for use in an opening statement, and he said just make sure that it doesn't go on longer than the state's opening did, and they made sure that it didn't. And in that state opening defense statement, they read aloud the jury instruction of self-defense, noting that the use of deadly defensive force was lawful if necessary to stop a reasonably perceived imminent and unlawful threat of death or grave bodily injury. And he used the exhibits to illustrate exactly how thoroughly these conditions were met for each and every one of the use of force charges against Kyle. He then walks you through the timeline of events that we've already covered here. He illustrates Kyle's desperate flight to the police line down the street to turn himself in, only to be pursued down the street as if by a pack of animals. He also highlighted Kyle's provision of medical care to those who had been injured, his genuine desire to protect the city's private property from riot, looting and arson, his running with a fire extinguisher to put out what he believed to be another car lot about to be incinerated. He also noted that the state claimed reporter McGuinness, I think Richard McGuinness, who shows up later in this as a state's witness on day 3, as a victim of purported reckless endangerment by Kyle. McGuinness himself would testify that he was never in fear of Kyle at any point. So moving on, we've got the first witness that they called up, Dominic Black, who was with Kyle during the events and carried his own gun and medical equipment. I believe that he was like the primary person that Kyle was sort of teamed with during the whole riot. He says that they brought the medical equipment and guns to help people. I believe Black also testified that Kyle had stolen the gun from him somehow, for some reason, although there is a bit of suspicious activity going on with this, because Black himself is being charged with having provided Kyle Rittenhouse the gun, and the person presiding over those charges, who brought those charges forward, is Binger, the assistant district attorney. So it seems to be that there might be a little bit of suspicious behaviour going on behind the scenes, where it's like, if you say what we want you to say, then we may go a bit easier on you. Is as far as as far as I can tell is what it looks like. So he said that they were there for a business called Car Source, which is where the initial confrontation with Rosenbaum went down, who had asked them to protect the business, and Black had stayed on the roof while Kyle had decided to stick to the streets to provide medical aid to people, which is a pretty ballsy thing to do, to be perfectly honest. When there's rioters going down there, I think it clearly shows an intent that he wanted to help people, even putting himself in risk. He even said that he'd seen Kyle administer aid to people. So as part
he said he was there to administer medical aid and put out fires and things, and he did do those things.
Yep.
Right, okay.
Yep, prosecution tried to get Black to state that once he had gotten home, because Black's the guy who drove Rittenhouse home across state lines.
Oh God,
dear.
not across state lines.
I know.
Build a wall.
He'd driven Rittenhouse home. His family and Rittenhouse and his family discussed getting him across into a different state and hiding him. But upon cross-examination by the defense, they got him to admit that no, that was just Kyle's mum. Saying that that she wanted to do that, and Kyle, of course, obviously, as shown by his actions, wanted to turn himself into the police. Yep. So that bit of evidence was just thrown straight out in terms of, that bit of testimony was just thrown straight out because, it clarified. The second witness is where we get a lot of the FBI information from, but that wasn't broadcast on television or online. I don't know exactly why. And the third witness, for some reason, was a social media influencer who was only a partial witness, and after 40 minutes of questioning, they were just like, well, we'll just take a recess for the day. So evidently the social media influencer didn't really provide anything of much import for that. So then we skip on to day 2, where the prosecution witnesses, as far as we can tell, were still failing to contradict self-defense. There were a few witnesses gone through here, but the most important thing was they were examining the criminal investigation done by the police after the initial shooting. So in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse, the police simply seized physical possession of his phone, which obviously was taken for evidence. He was, after all, a criminal suspect and began the process to download its data. It turned out, however, that the phone could not be cracked by the Kenosha Police Department, and they thought, okay, well, we'll just send it off to the FBI and their lab will crack it. Except it turned out that the FBI also lacked the ability to crack Kyle's phone.
Well, they had a big set to with Apple a few years ago because they couldn't break into the phones, and they were really annoyed that they couldn't force Apple to do it. Apple oh no, civil rights.
Well, that's the thing.
Which is nice, but
Kyle had an iPhone with the latest operating system, and the FBI's technology had not been developed to crack the combination. So when all this came to the attention of Kyle's attorneys, they consulted with their client and made an offer to the police. We'll just give you the passcode to unlock it if you want.
Kyle's just like, well, this is the number.
Yeah, and we'll give you unlimited access to everything because presumably there's nothing incriminating on there.
Obviously there wasn't.
And all they asked in return was a copy of the data for themselves. However, this is very different to how the police handled the investigation into Grosskreutz.
Oh, really?
Yes. So, despite having the search warrant in hand during a meeting with Grosskreutz and his lawyers or people, and Grosskreutz was there and his cell phone was there at this meeting, the investigators ended up not serving the search warrant on him, not seizing his phone, and not downloading the contents. Not only was Grosskreutz the only person of interest to this investigation who did not have his phone downloaded, he was also the only person in Detective Howard's experience of any Kenosha PD investigation ever where a search warrant for a phone download had not been served. So it seems a little bit suspicious.
So for some reason, on every other one they've done this, but not on him.
Yes, just not on him for some reason. Kind of makes it seem a little bit like they were trying to...
As they put on the blog, though, this is an exceptional breach of standard investigative procedure.
Yes, absolutely. It seems as though they were trying to stack the deck against Kyle because presumably on that phone was probably some evidence of Grosskreutz going, let's go F some people up at this riot tonight.
Oh,
presumably. That's just speculation on my part.
One of the things that... I looked through all the criminal histories of the people that Kyle was involved with here, and one of the things that unites them all is they're all just violent people. They've got a history of violence, like for years, many criminal convictions, and few of them have been to jail.
Well, so speaking of that, The day 3, if we move along again, they brought in a few state witnesses for the prosecution, one being Richard McGinnis, who was the Daily Caller reporter who was physically present there following Rittenhouse and Rosenbaum while their confrontation and altercation was going on, and another witness called Ryan Balch, who was an industrial worker who was there on the night and met both Rosenbaum and Kyle Rittenhouse. Both of these were supposed to help the prosecution's case, but seems to have both helped the defense instead by painting Rosenbaum as a very violent person who was looking to start a fight. There is more evidence.
I mean, it seems to be self-evident from the
footage,
video
but it's nice to have some testimony to that as well. So if we play the clip, we'll get on to McGinnis, who kind of blew a big hole in it in the first place. But this is Balch's some of his testimony. If you just play this.
And I stepped in and told everybody, chill out, calm down, stop doing that. I turned and had an exchange with one of the protesters, and I kind of explained to that protester, hey, you know, I get what you're trying to do, but, like, not this. And when I turned around, Rosenbaum was right there in front of my face, yelling and screaming, and I said, dude, back up, just chill, I don't know what your problem is. And he goes, you know what? If I catch any of you guys alone tonight, I'm going to fucking kill you.
And he said that to you?
Correct.
Did he say that to the defendant as well?
The defendant was there, so yes.
And that's the prosecutor talking about.
Yes, that is the prosecutor, who seemingly, most of the witnesses he has brought forward just seem to have damaged his own case.
Yes. The person I'm trying to make a case for is an absolute psychopath. I rest my case.
Yeah.
Defense.
And just evident, it seems to show intent and motive for Rosenbaum wanting to assault Kyle, not the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and if we move along, so this is in regards to Richard McGinnis's testimony. He's once again the reporter from the Daily Caller. For more than 12 minutes, Binger tried to get McGinnis to testify that Rosenbaum was already falling to the ground when Rittenhouse began shooting him. In other words, that Rittenhouse simply executed Rosenbaum by shooting him in the back when he was helplessly falling.
Right.
The actual exchange is in a video in this, so if you're interested, check out the links. But they sort of paraphrase it here. Binger, so Rittenhouse shot Rosenbaum in the back as he was falling. McGinnis, no, Rittenhouse didn't fire until Rosenbaum charged and lunged at him. Binger, so he shot him as he was falling. McGinnis, no, not falling, lunging. Binger, so you're saying he shot him while he was falling? McGinnis, that's not my testimony. Yeah, that's paraphrasing it, but I've listened to it, and it's basically that, because McGinnis himself specifically states from what he could see that Rittenhouse was running away and stopped and turned around, had his gun pointed towards the ground, and Rosenbaum just kept going for him and then lunged at him, and it was only after lunging at him Rittenhouse opened fired, and then he fell over. And Binger was just trying desperately to make it sound like this falling action was what he was already doing when he opened fire.
In Binger's defense, it is a very difficult thing to have to defend.
Absolutely.
Like, I mean, like you've got to be really creative.
This paedophile was lunging at a 17-year-old, Your Honor.
And the 17-year-old defended himself with a gun. Right, okay. Oh, God, how can I make the boy that look like he's in the wrong here? Yeah, exactly. Not an enviable job, I have to say.
Yeah. And then after being cross-examined by the defense, who just confirmed everything that you already said, we got this wonderful clip of Binger basically trying to dismiss his own witness's testimony. So if you just play this one.
And you've already established that after the shooting, Mr. Rosenbaum never says a word, correct?
Correct.
You don't know, as you sit here today, what Mr. Rosenbaum was thinking, do you?
You mean at the time of the shooting?
Yes. Or at any point in his life. I mean, you have no idea what Mr. Rosenbaum was ever thinking at any point in his life. You have never been inside his head. You never met him before. You don't know.
I've never exchanged words with him, if that's what your question is.
So your interpretation of what he was trying to do or what he was intending to do or anything along those lines is complete guesswork, isn't it?
Well, he said, fuck you, and then he reached for the weapon.
Let's talk about that. At that very moment,
I mean, how bad does that look?
I love the guy's face. Well, he said F you and then reached for the weapon. I mean, reasonable inferences abound, I think.
He just looks confused as like, why are you asking me these questions?
Yeah, no, I'm not a mind reader, but that's what we have speech for. And his speech and actions were pretty awful.
Yeah, I suppose the question would be, what was he thinking when he was doing this? But,
okay, Mr. Binger, what's your takeaway from that?
Yeah, so that's how the prosecution seems to be going, and just of note on day 3 as well, one of the jurors was dismissed for making a joke about the shooting of Jacob Blake, which people may be aware of. So this CNN article talks about it. A juror was dismissed in Carl Rittenhouse homicide trial on Thursday morning after he told a joke to a deputy earlier in the week about the police shooting of Jacob Blake. Apparently he was being taken to his car and just made the joke offhand to a bailiff, which was a bad idea. Apparently the joke was something along the lines of, why did it take 7 shots to shoot Jacob Blake? Because the police didn't have any more bullets. Something like that.
Blake survived, you know.
Did he?
He's in a wheelchair now.
Oh yeah, he's paralysed, isn't he? Yeah. So the judge called the juror into court for questioning. The juror affirmed that he told the joke but declined to repeat it. Juror, a middle-aged man, looked ill at ease, fumbling and holding a portable microphone and speaking through a multicoloured face mask, according to the pool reporter in court. So that's all just CNN there.
Yeah.
My feelings is it has nothing to do with the case, but the judge and the defence and the prosecution all agreed to dismiss him because if he's making jokes about the police shooting, then it kind of points to a certain bias.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so
not terribly interesting, that bit.
Yeah, they just chucked him out.
Thanks for watching this clip from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters. We broadcast live on lotuseaters.com at 1 p.m. UK time every weekday. And we also have loads more content that we don't put on YouTube, such as the memes and video comments from our community. Every week we also have new episodes of our regular series, Contemplations and Epochs. In Contemplations, Josh explores interesting and diverse topics, such as the science behind the need for fathers in the home, or why people believe in ghosts and the paranormal. In Epochs, Bo and I go on, often at length, about various events and periods in history that are particularly fascinating. We've just finished a 5-part mini-series on the 100 Years' War, which I particularly enjoyed right up until the end of it when, spoiler alert, the French won. Alongside our excellent team of in-house writers, we also commission articles from outside contributors, and Silver and Gold tier subscribers have access to an audio recording of each premium article, so you don't have to read it yourself. We interview various contemporary thinkers and entertainers, as well as host the recordings of our live events. We also have a series of premium video content on the site, which we think is particularly worthwhile, or we simply can't put on YouTube because their editorial policies prohibit reasonable discussion on the subject. Personally, I think the deep dives we've been doing into critical theory and critical race theory are most important, as we reveal the origins of intersectionality and the plan that the radical left has for our societies. We are funded almost exclusively by our subscribers, so if you'd like to join us in the work we're doing, head over to lotuseaters.com and we'll see you there.